I just think that's so cool. Like Philips Hue, man, they do it right. That's just so sweet. Do you see that? You can have white, you can have orange, you can have blue, you can have green, any color we want. Or I can have this little preset that's made just for the studio. I can just tap right here and boop, there we are. We're in our video studio preset. So that is not the topic of today's video. The topic of today's video is this little gem, the GoPro Hero 7 Black. Now, I've been a long-time GoPro user. I've been using GoPro since I think the Hero 960, which was like this little behemoth silver jobby that shot 960p, which back then was like the shiz, man. It was awesome. Anyway, I like GoPros. Now, a couple little disclaimers. Number one, I am not an action sports athlete. I don't really do anything that extreme. Like the most extreme I get is like a mountain bike ride or a road bike ride or running. Like that's pretty much it for me. I don't use the GoPro to record my epic raft adventures because I just don't do that kind of stuff. I'm gonna come at this review as just an average Joe. Like that's pretty much what I do. I'm kind of like boring in a lot of cases. An average Joe who wants a really simple, easy to use camera. Now today I want to do two things. Number one, I want to talk about and kind of review this little guy. But number two, I want to talk about some of the basics on how to use it. Some of the simple kind of why you might want to incorporate it into your workflow and how to set up the simple functions on this camera. So we're going to go into that, talk about my impressions. Let's get started right now. First of all, special thanks to Canon. They are the sponsor of this video. Also, this is weird to say sponsor. Canon's basically loaning us these cameras to use because we don't have anything this nice. These are C300s. They do a beautiful job. Canon, you guys are awesome. Special thanks to you guys. So I want to start off with my initial impressions. I've owned the Hero 960, I've owned the Hero 5 Black, and now I own the Hero 7 Black. And when the Hero 6 came out, I thought about upgrading to it, but the biggest difference between the 5 and the 6 was that the 6 shot 4K at 60 frames per second, which while cool, I'm still kind of a 1080p guy. Like honestly, I shoot most things in 1080p. I think most things can be shot in 1080p. So for me, that wasn't really worth it. But when the 7 came out and offered their like hyper smooth stabilization, that was super really just nice. I liked that idea. Previously, I had been using the Hero 5 with the little Karma grip stabilizer. I never bought the drone, but I bought the grip because I thought just a little handheld gimbal, pretty awesome. And it worked super well. Like I brought that everywhere. But the fact that this can do almost as well as a gimbal with the Hero 5 was just enough to make me do it. So I made the upgrade. I sold actually the 5 and the gimbal because this just does such a good it's so smooth. This is not, however, good for low light stuff. So a little bit getting into the review, low light photography, because the sensor is so small on the GoPro, it's just not great. And another thing that I think we should address is a lot of people ask like, why would you use a GoPro over your phone? And to me, phones are kind of annoying. Like I don't really like to take my phone out of the pocket. I kind of like having a dedicated little camera. Image quality wise, this is probably pretty similar to what my iPhone can do or what your Android phone can do. There's not really going to be that much difference. The difference really comes in just a dedicated device for what you want it to do. As an example, I can leave this set up for like 2-3 hours shooting a time lapse. That's one of the things I love to use this for. And I don't have to worry about my phone running out of battery. I don't have to not have my phone for 3 hours. I can literally just leave this camera set up, boom, done, leave it for a few hours, and it's cool. My use case for the GoPro is really just shooting photos on trips, shooting photos when I'm doing something that I think is particularly cool. And anytime I want to use a camera that I don't have to worry about, I can just throw it in my bag, head off, start using it, and everything's great. Overall, amazing camera. I really think it's worth it over the Hero 5 or 6 or whatever you happen to have, simply because of that hyper smooth stabilization. Now I want to get a little bit into how I use the GoPro and how I set it up. And in order to do that, gotta get my notes out. Wrote everything down so that I could not forget. So my general use cases for the GoPro are really 3 things. I like to use it for video, I like to use it for photo, and I like to use it for time lapses. Time lapses in particular, probably the thing I do the most with the GoPro, simply because of how easy it is. Obviously, I know how to make a DSLR time lapse or a mirrorless time lapse, but it takes time. You've got to put everything together in Premiere, and if you want it to look good, there's a lot of processing that goes into it. GoPro makes it simple, which I really appreciate. So the first thing I want to talk about when it comes to GoPro setup are the preferences, the things that are kind of behind the scenes. They're not your day-to-day settings, but they really will make your life a lot easier. The first thing is formatting the memory card. I felt the need to pause right here and make something abundantly clear. For those of you who are just starting out in photography or who are watching this and don't know that much about photography, formatting a memory card will erase all of the data that's on the card, all of the photos and the videos. So never format a card until you're sure that you have all of those images backed up, on another hard drive, whether that's on your computer or on your phone or wherever it happens to be sure you have the content somewhere else, or understand that you're going to lose it all. Formatting will erase all of the data. On top of that, formatting is better than doing a standard erase all because it actually makes that card work better with the device you are formatting it in. So if you have a card that was in some other camera, it's going to be good practice to, when you put that card in a new camera, format it in the new camera that you just put it into. That will prevent there being any further complications down the road with corrupted files and so on and so forth. But the take home here is formatting a memory card will erase all of your information. All right, let's jump back into it. Formatting is one of the most important things you can do really with any camera, and GoPro's no exception. So make sure you're taking the time to properly format the card. Second thing is date and time. You can go into the menu, you can set the date and the time. And the importance of that is I like to sync my GoPro with my other cameras. And that way, when I import images into Lightroom, the GoPro images nicely intermix with my main camera images, and I'm not really confused by that. Little pro tip too, if you're looking for it, if you are working in Lightroom and you've got your GoPro images mixed up with your main camera images, you can actually make a little smart collection, or even make some keywords, or even do a little attribute search for either the GoPro images or the other camera. So if you aren't wanting them to be intermixed, you want to specifically say GoPro or DSLR, you can set up smart collections. You can set up so many different ways to do that. I have that set up in my catalog at home. I really enjoy that. It works really well for me. To switch between the different modes on the GoPro is a little bit new this time. All you actually do is swipe to the left or to the right on the screen on the camera, and it will switch you between time-lapse mode, video mode, photo mode, etc., which is really nice. It's a super smooth interface that I think a lot of us are used to, and I appreciated that update. You can also tap in the lower left-hand corner to change sub-modes. So what I mean by that is within the time-lapse kind of family, there are different time-lapse modes. There's the hyperlapse, or time warp as they call it. There's time-lapse photo, time-lapse video, and you get to those by tapping in the lower left when you are selected on the time-lapse mode. So fairly easy to navigate. Some simple swiping, simple tapping, we can get ourselves in the mode that we want to be in. Next part 2 I want to talk about is actually photo settings, how I set this thing up for photography. Now for me, my goal with shooting with the GoPro, especially still images, is like I said earlier, it's a simple camera, it's not going to be amazing on image quality, but that wide angle lens gets a really cool field of view, it does a nice thing for your images, and also it's so simple. Important settings here for me with photography are I want to be on RAW, that's pretty crucial, and honestly when you choose RAW on the GoPro, there's not a lot of other things you can do. Once you set it to RAW photo, things like white balance, things like that don't really matter because they're changeable after the fact when you get the images into Lightroom. Now a couple quick things I want to mention. If you are shooting RAW on the GoPro, don't get the images into Lightroom and expect the same editability that you would get on a DSLR or mirrorless RAW file. There's not going to be as much depth to the image, not as much push and pull as you can get on an actual still frame from a DSLR or mirrorless camera. Also in the shadows, you can expect to have more noise, you can expect to have less dynamic range. There's all the things that kind of go along with a camera being this big. So do keep that in mind. I also prefer to keep ProTune turned off when I'm shooting on RAW, simply because a lot of those settings, like I said earlier, don't really matter. The only thing I will use ProTune for is if I want to turn down the maximum ISO so that the camera won't jack the ISO so high that I end up getting a lot of noise in my images. So sometimes I'll just opt to set max ISO to 400 or 800 so the camera can't go crazy and make it super, super high and I end up with noisy images. Do keep in mind though that if you lock the ISO down, it's going to have to make up for it with shutter speed. Aperture obviously can't change on these cameras. It's going to have to make up for it with shutter speed, and if it can't do that, it might just take too dark of an image. So you may run into that. Honestly, most of the time, ProTune is off, RAW is on, I'm just shooting, that's how I roll. Part 3 would be time-lapse settings. I put time-lapse settings next because time-lapse is kind of photo and it's kind of video, so we put it there in the middle. I'm going to set my time-lapse up one of two ways, either a more traditional time-lapse or the hyperlapse function. Now what the hyperlapse function does is it actually uses the in-camera stabilization to smooth out the video that it's shooting, and then it speeds up that video to give you the hyperlapse effect. A traditional time-lapse is going to shoot picture, 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 and put them together at 30 or 60 frames per second. So a hyperlapse will give you more stability. Like if you're kind of hiking and you've got a nice chest mount and you're rolling around like that, the hyperlapse is going to be much smoother than the time-lapse will be. In fact, greatly smoother. But if you just have the camera set up on like the top of your car and there's not a lot of movement because you're on top of the car, obviously with respect to the car, it won't move too much. Then you might go with the time-lapse setting, or if it's on a tripod, time-lapse setting, so you can kind of play with those two. Personally, I think the hyperlapse setting is better. It looks a lot smoother, but there's also some inherent things that we can't really fine-tune about it that we can with the time-lapse. With hyperlapse, I like to set my resolution to 4K 16:9. If we can shoot in 4K, we might as well shoot in 4K. I set my speed modifier depending on how fast things are gonna happen in the frame. So you gotta think about this. What the GoPro is essentially doing is it's gonna shoot just plain old video. And the speed modifier determines how much that video is sped up. As an example, if you plan to go on a hike that's a half an hour long, and you set your speed modifier to 2 times. That means that the final hyperlapsed video will run 2 times speed, which means you'll get a 15-minute time lapse or hyperlapse out of a 30-minute hike, which is a little bit too long. Like 15 minutes is a lot of video to watch. So if you plan on doing something that's gonna take a long time, you're gonna wanna set that speed modifier even faster to get it set correctly. And luckily GoPro even says, like, for this amount of video, it's gonna get this result, depending on what speed modifier you have picked. So pick a fast enough speed modifier that you're getting like 30 seconds or a minute of end time-lapse footage when it's all said and done. One thing I should say is with hyperlapses, you can always speed them up in post-production. You can't slow them down. So I would err on the side of less speed modifier versus more. If you end up with a 10-minute time lapse in Premiere, you can always set the speed to 200% and make that into a 5-minute time lapse. Whereas if you end up with a 1-second time lapse, you can't necessarily make it run at half speed and get a 2-second time lapse. And even then that would be so stinking short. So do keep that in mind, that speeding up footage is always possible while slowing down is not necessarily possible. If I'm planning on doing a video time lapse, like a simple, more traditional shot time lapse, we have the choice of making a video time lapse or a series of stills time lapse. I honestly prefer the video time lapse function simply because the whole point of the GoPro in my eyes is to make my life easier. The reason I'm gonna bring this and not a DSLR is because I don't want to deal with a DSLR. And if at the end me shooting a big time lapse, I'm left with like 50 or 5,000 individual still frames and I have to bring them into Premiere, set the duration to 1 frame, put them in a sequence, like do all that stuff, I've already just might as well use my DSLR. So if you are not shooting hyperlapse time-lapse and you want to shoot traditional time-lapse, I prefer the time-lapse video function because what you're going to get out of it is an actual video file. You can just throw it into Premiere, use it, done. There's not really a lot we have to worry about after the fact. Here again, I'm going to set my resolution to 4K. I'm going to set my field of view to wide so I get as much in the frame as possible. And then I'm going to set my interval. Now, interval is one of those things that a lot of people have a hard time with, and it basically comes down to some very simple math. I like to plan on wanting about 30 seconds of end time-lapse footage, meaning once I get it in Premiere, it's all said and done, I want about 30 seconds of usable time-lapse. Now, assuming that we are working at 30 frames per second in our timeline, or 24 frames per second, whatever you want to do, we need to figure out how many total frames we need to shoot. So 30 seconds at, let's just make the math easy, 30 frames per second. Obviously, if it was 24, you could sub that in. 30 frames at 30 frames per second means that we need 900 frames to get to 30 seconds. We need 900 frames of video, 900 frames of stills, excuse me. So if we need 900 frames of stills and we are going to shoot a time lapse, we need to know how long the time lapse is going to take. And this is where you have to guess. So think about it. You're out there and you're about to shoot a sunset, right? And you want to get one of those really cool shots where it goes from sunset to night and you get darkness and it looks really epic and cool. And then the Milky Way pops out and there's like aliens and stuff, like cool things happen, right? Let's say that that's your goal. Well, if that's your goal, let's say that from the start time to the end time is about an hour and a half, let's say. So you plan on starting, let's say the sun goes down at 7, you plan on starting at 6:30, getting up until sunset, and then shooting an hour after sunset. So you're just gonna leave the GoPro shooting frames for an hour and a half. Well, in that hour and a half, we need 900 frames, okay? Well, here's the cool thing. An hour and a half is how many minutes? Well, that's 60 minutes an hour plus an extra half an hour, so 90 minutes. So we have 90 minutes to shoot 900 frames. I'm only getting out the calculator here because you should have a calculator and you should get used to doing this computation. I'm gonna get my calculator out. Ooh, clear out whatever I was doing before. So we'll clear that out. And all we're gonna do is we're gonna take 90 minutes, and I'm actually gonna convert 90 minutes into seconds, because I wanna know the duration in seconds that we want to use. So I'm gonna take 90, how many seconds are in a minute? 60, right? So we do 90 times 60. So in 90 minutes, there are 5,400 seconds. And in that amount of time, we want 900 frames. So how many seconds per frame? Well, we take 5,400, we divide it by the number of frames we want, which is 900, and we're left with 6. Factor of 10, like I said before, same exact thing. We're left with 6. That means that we would want to set our GoPro to an interval of 6 seconds in order to get enough frames to make this time lapse work. Now the GoPro doesn't have 6 seconds, so we would probably do 5 seconds, so we would get even more than 900 frames, and we would be left with a longer time lapse. Now again, we always want to be left with more rather than less, because we can always speed up footage and we can't slow footage down. So very simple math. If you're going for a 30-second time lapse at 30 frames per second, that's 900 frames. Take however long your event is going to happen, whatever it is you're shooting. Say you're shooting like dinner with your family. Let's go super like simple GoPro use, right? You want to do a cool time lapse of everyone eating dinner at Thanksgiving. Easy. Let's say dinner is going to last 45 minutes. So 45 minutes times 60 seconds is whatever that happens to be. You take that number, divide it by 900, and you're left with the interval that you should set the GoPro to. Super, super simple, I think at least, and it works really, really well. The 900 frame idea is really awesome because it makes math pretty relatively simple. All right, so hopefully that makes some sense. Part 4 is video settings. So if you just want to use this to shoot some plain old video, that is totally doable as well. Again, we're gonna set the resolution to 4K. I'm gonna set my frames per second to 60. That's a little debatable. Obviously, if you need more slow-mo ability, you could go 1080p at 120. You can kind of push and pull, but generally 4K 60 works really well for me. Again, I'm not doing anything too exciting. Here I'm gonna turn Pro Tune on because there's some really good ways that we can make the footage look better. They're pretty simple. Number one is we want to set the sharpness to low. We don't want a lot of digital sharpening happening, especially if you're going to take the GoPro footage and integrate it with other cameras. Having too much sharpness makes the GoPro footage really stand out. It looks like it doesn't really match. It's not great. Number two, we're going to set the ISO minimum to 100 and the ISO maximum to 100. I really wish GoPro would just let us pick an ISO versus making us set a high point and a low point. But by setting the minimum at 100 and the maximum at 100, we're basically saying, GoPro, use an ISO of 100 all the time. That's kind of where we're going with that. Number three, I'm going to set the color profile to GoPro. That just gives it this nice color to it. I will say though that if you are wanting to match this with other camera footage, you might go to flat, because flat is going to really reduce the contrast and give you a little bit more ability to grade it in post. Quick note on that though, because the GoPro has such bad dynamic range in some situations, the flat that this shoots is nothing compared to like DSLR flat log or mirrorless flat log or cinema camera flat log. It's not going to be amazing, but if you are trying to camera match, it will give you a little bit more kind of push-pull ability. Lastly, I'm going to pick the standard field of view simply because it works the best for me. It's what's native to the camera. So that's basically it. I think for me, again, I'm going to use this for stills, use this for time lapse, whether that's hyperlapse or traditional time lapse, and I'm going to use it for video. And with all that said, this is a pretty awesome camera. I'm really impressed. I think they've done a lot of good things. The stabilization in it is not quite as good as it used to be with my Hero 5 and the Karma grip. But again, that was a pretty massive thing to pack around. The fact that this contains most of that and does it all together is pretty darn cool. I really like this. The other thing I'll say is I think if you're a photographer who goes on vacations and wants to take nice vacation pictures, this is a really great way to do it. I like my phone, it's great and all of that, but having a device that I can just take and set up and do what I want to is really awesome. Now, a couple quick things I want to mention are accessories. If you are getting a GoPro, I would recommend that you pick up the dual battery charger. The fact is, out of the box, the way that you charge this is by opening this little door and plugging it into the wall through USB, which is fine, but you can't use the GoPro usually because you'll be charging it, and the only way to charge the battery is with plugging it into the wall. So getting the dual battery charger lets you actually charge batteries without having the GoPro plugged in, so you can use it it while your batteries are charging, which makes some sense. The other thing I would recommend looking at are different mounts. One thing that makes the GoPro platform so cool is the availability of mounts out there. You can get head mounts, chest mounts, wrist mounts, like mouth mounts. There's a ton of them, and they're all good for different things. What I would recommend though is don't buy any mounts to start with. See what you like and see what you don't like, because a lot of times I bought mounts in the past and I've ended up not using them simply because it's not somewhere that I really want to mount my GoPro. My personal favorites are the clamp mount. You can clamp this big clamp to anything you want, and the GoPro will sit there. I like the tripod mount. I also like the chest mount. I think the chest mount provides some really like interesting, you kind of look like a T-Rex as you're rolling around because you see the arms. It's pretty cool. But again, there's a lot of varieties of mounts out there. I would wait and see kind of what your preferences are before you buy any. Overall, I think this is a wonderful camera. It definitely has its shortcomings when it comes to image quality, but I don't think really anyone's expecting GoPro to put out these amazing photos like we get on our DSLRs. I hope you liked this video. If you did, I'd love you to hit the like button. That's much appreciated. If you disliked it, hit the dislike button. There is a cool Photoshop tutorial coming out next week that Jeff is doing on LAB color mode or lab color mode, which is pretty cool. If you missed it, check out his curves tutorial because that was awesome. There's a link down in the description down there. And lastly, hit subscribe if you want to stay up to date. You can subscribe up there, you can subscribe down there, because we release videos every single week. Also, YouTube's kind of crappy. I've used crappy a lot. I need to get a better word. YouTube is kind of not great at notifying people when our videos come out. So if you hit the little bell icon down next to the subscribe button, you'll get an email or a text message. I think you can choose how YouTube notifies you whenever we post future content. Thank you guys for watching.